On the morning of my 75th birthday, my son shouted, "Everyone's tired of you, just leave." His wife hurled my celebration cake onto the floor, but what I did afterward left every guest stunned, and by the very next day, my son's life had fallen apart. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. It warms my heart to know how far my voice reaches. Now settle in. Today, I turned 75. The number felt full and weighty, like an old oak standing in a field. You face the mirror in the morning, and it looks back at you from deep within, from the soft lines at your eyes, from the silver in your hair. Was I afraid? No. It felt more like a quiet confusion. Is this really me? Did I truly live all of this? My little two-bedroom apartment smelled of warm sugar and spices. I had been in the kitchen since sunrise, making my signature sweet potato pound cake, the one passed down from my mother. I baked it when I married my husband, Jabari. I baked it for Keon's first birthday, for every birthday after, and for his farewell before he left for boot camp. That smell carried my whole life in it. To me, it was the scent of home, the scent of love. I brushed my fingers across the worn kitchen table where I used to layer my cakes. Its smooth but scratched surface remembered Jabari repairing an old iron on it, and little Keon stacking wooden blocks into crooked towers. Today, the table held only flour and a rolling pin, and my hands moved more slowly than they once did. The dough felt warm and responsive as I shaped it into a thin round. Bits of memory drifted through my mind, not full thoughts. Keon had called yesterday. "Mom, I need you to cover something for me. It's urgent. The car needs a new part, a serious one." His voice trembled with worry. How could I refuse? I pulled from the little I had saved for emergencies, nearly my entire Social Security check, and handed it over. "Thanks, Mom. You're amazing," he'd said before hurrying out. I sighed, not in irritation, but with that familiar sense of duty only a mother knows. It's like a lifelong debt, isn't it? While you're alive, you keep helping your children. Even when your child is almost 50 and you're left with two wrinkled $20 bills until the next check. It's fine. I'm used to living simply. Rice and beans will hold me over. What matters is that they're all right. One by one, the cake layers baked, filling the apartment with comfort. My eyes drifted to the photo on the wall. Jabari and I, young, standing arm in arm beside the lakeside house we were building. He did nearly all the work himself. He dreamed we'd retire there, grow roses, and watch our grandchildren play. He never made it. He passed far too early, leaving me to finish raising a 15-year-old Keon on my own. Back then, I was a senior design engineer. I had projects, travel plans, dreams of seeing the Great Lakes, visiting Mackinac Island, but I let it all go. I had to. My son needed me, and I held on to that purpose like a rope in a storm. My whole life, every bit of strength, every unfulfilled dream, it all went into him, into my boy. And now that boy is nearly 50, and I'm still baking him the sweet potato cake he loves. We chose to celebrate my birthday at the lakehouse. Of course we did. According to my daughter-in-law, Serafina, my apartment was too cramped and outdated, like some storage area. She said it without blinking when I suggested hosting the gathering here, staring past me the whole time. Keon had only shrugged, as if to say, "Well, Mom, she's right. The lake house has more space and fresh air." I didn't argue. The lake house had once been mine. It was the last thing that still belonged to Jabari, to the life we built together. Yet I hardly visited it anymore. Serafina and Keon had been living there for nearly 15 years since their wedding. They renovated everything, furnished it in their own modern style, trendy and sleek. Nothing of Jabari remained. They even cut down the old maple trees we once planted together. "They just make a mess and block the light," Serafina had said. In their place stood a perfectly trimmed lawn and a stylish, modern fire pit. I came to my own house as if I were a guest. People began arriving around 3. That morning, I'd taken a taxi with bags of groceries, making appetizers, salads, and pinwheel sandwiches. Serafina greeted the guests on the porch, smiling elegantly in a beautiful dress. She kissed my cheek quickly. She smelled of expensive perfume and faint irritation. "Mrs. Okoro, why don't you head to the kitchen? You still need to finish the cheese board and watch the hot dishes so they don't cool." And so I went. My birthday turned into another day of service. I stood in a kitchen I hardly recognized, all polished tile and stainless steel, slicing cheese and meats, arranging them neatly on trays. Laughter, clinking glasses, and scattered conversations floated in from the living room. My name was only mentioned once, when someone called out, "Where's the birthday girl?" Serafina replied brightly, "Oh, she's being our little helper in the kitchen," and everyone laughed. I carried out the platters, set them on the table, and immediately began clearing the dirty ones. No one offered me a place to sit. I felt like part of the furniture, quiet, useful, unnoticed. For a moment, I perched on the edge of a chair a little ways off. The conversation shifted to the lakehouse. One of Jabari's old friends, Elias Eli Dubois, reminisced, "I remember when Jabari and I planted that pine right over there. Look how tall it is now." I smiled, wanting to hold on to that small, warm memory. "Yes, and we buried a little treasure under it," I began. "Keon was just a baby. We wrapped it in a handkerchief." "Oh, Dad, not be old stories again," Serafina cut in, turning to her own father. "Keon and I are thinking of flying to Turks and Caicos next year. The beaches are incredible. The service is top class, not like these old pines and mosquitoes." The conversation instantly shifted to Turks and Caicos, resorts, and airfare. My tiny buried treasure, a shard of glass, 3 marbles, and a rusty quarter, stayed forgotten underground. A cold heaviness filled my chest. I quietly stood and slipped back into the kitchen. I'd rather scrub dishes than sit there unseen at my own birthday celebration. Then came the turning point. Cake time. My sweet potato pound cake. I had spent half the day preparing it. The layers were soaked with cream cheese frosting, soft, tender, melting on the tongue. I topped it with shaved chocolate and pecans, carefully shaping the number 75. I brought it out on the large round platter we'd received for our 25th anniversary. I carried it with my last small hope. This was my offering of love, my real gift. Perhaps now. I set the cake at the center of the table. It looked truly homemade, truly heartfelt. "Oh, Imani Sadia, why would you do that?" Serafina's voice shot across the room, sharp with open disdain. "We already have a proper store-bought cake from a fancy bakery. No one is going to eat this sad little homemade thing."
Now hold on, Serafina. Imani's pound cake? Now that is the taste of childhood. That's real tradition. I'm definitely having a slice. In fact, give me 2. And that was it. The final spark that lit the fuse. The word tradition, spoken in front of her stylish, upscale friends, landed like an insult to Serafina. It tore through the polished image of the modern, sophisticated hostess she had worked so hard to uphold. Her expression twisted, her eyes flashing with cold, concentrated rage. With a sharp, practiced movement, she seized my platter. "Tradition belongs in a museum," she hissed through clenched teeth. And before anyone could react, she tipped the platter over, sending my pound cake, my hours of work, my love, straight into the trash can by the wall. "We're celebrating the future," she declared. A crushing, absolute silence filled the room. The only sound was the soft, heavy thud of the cake settling at the bottom of the bin. All eyes shifted from the trash to me. I froze, staring at my son, waiting, hoping, praying he would stand up for me, end this humiliation.
Stop this from becoming real. Keon rose to his feet. His face was red, twisted. He looked at the guests' horrified expressions, at his wife's victorious smirk, and then chose the easiest target, me. He jabbed a trembling finger toward me and screamed so loudly my ears buzzed. "Look what you did! You embarrassed us! Everyone is tired of you! You never act right! Get out! Get out! Do you hear me? Everyone is sick of you!" In that instant, nothing inside me broke. No, something thin and overstretched simply snapped. Not with a dramatic crack, but like a worn wire, pulled too tight for too many years, finally giving way. The ringing in my ears didn't fade. Instead, it narrowed into one long, steady note. A strange, deep stillness settled over me. It felt as though the part of me that spent 50 years hoping, apologizing, forgiving, waiting for love had been cut out cleanly, without anesthesia, by a surgeon's precise hand. I looked at my son's twisted, furious face and understood. This was no longer my cake. This was no longer my lake house. And this was no longer my burden. I nodded once, a small, barely visible dip of my head. Agreed. I turned away without glancing at Keon's flushed face or the guests frozen in disbelief. I took one step, then another. My legs carried me forward on their own, as if following an old path my body remembered even when my mind did not. Behind me, silence filled the house like a vacuum. I reached the foyer and lifted my light, worn trench coat from its hook. The same hands that had trembled earlier while tying my apron now moved with calm precision, fastening the buttons. 1, 2, 3. Just right. I wrapped my scarf, picked up my purse. Inside were an empty wallet, the keys to my small city apartment, and a handkerchief. That was enough. I didn't turn around. I didn't speak. I simply opened the front door, stepped out into the cool evening air, and closed it quietly behind me. The click of the lock sounded like the final period at the end of a very long, very draining sentence. I walked toward the bus stop, barely aware of the road beneath my feet. Streetlights flickered across a lilac bush, a leaning fence. The world existed somewhere far away from me. Inside, there was only that long, clear note. It wiped out all emotion. No pain, no anger, no grief. Just a sharp, ringing clarity. A battered city bus rumbled up. I stepped inside and took a seat by the window, the cold, faux leather pressing against my back. Outside the window, the lights of unfamiliar homes and the outlines of trees drifted past. And inside my mind, like an accountant closing the books for the year, every memory was sorted and filed away, calmly, precisely. Not complaints, just facts. Fact number 1. My solid gold pendant, a gift from Jabari on my 30th birthday. Heavy, warm, honey-colored gold. I treasured it. About 5 years ago, it vanished. I tore apart my apartment searching for it, worried and even crying quietly at night. 6 months later, I saw it around Serafina's neck in a vacation photo. She was laughing, head thrown back, the sun glinting off my pendant. When I asked her, stumbling over the words, she responded lightly, "Oh, I found this at an antique shop. Can you believe it? Almost identical." I knew she wasn't telling the truth, but I said nothing. Fact number 2, the money. How many times had I emptied my savings for them? For a car down payment, for emergency repairs at the lake house, for tutoring before my granddaughter's college exams. I lived on yogurt and bread so they could relax in Turks and Caicos to help the kids unwind. They never once asked me to come. I was useful as their bank, but not as their family. I would look at their bright, sunlit photos by the ocean and whisper to myself, the important thing is that they're all right. Fact number 3, the slow erasing of me from their lives and from my own home. First, my photos were moved from the living room to the hallway by the guest bathroom. Then my favorite mug, the one I always used for tea, was accidentally broken. And gradually, Keon stopped calling me Mom, switching to the formal Mrs. Okoro, especially around Serafina's friends. It was like watching an old engraving being rubbed away so a shiny new one could take its place. The bus jolted over potholes, shaking me from my thoughts. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, a tired older woman in a simple coat. Behind her trailed years of swallowed words, dismissed hurt, and love given only one way, a one-direction road. And tonight, I had finally reached the end. The gate had dropped. He had said, "Get out." A son's command is law, so I would obey him. Exactly. That night, I slept better than I had since my youth. No dreams, no spiraling thoughts, no tightness in my throat. It felt as though a weight I had carried so long it became part of my body had suddenly been lifted away. I woke to bright sunlight pouring through the window, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy with loneliness. It felt light. It felt free. I rose, washed my face, and brewed coffee. My movements were slow, but filled with a new, unfamiliar resolve. I didn't write a plan. I simply knew what had to be done. From the old wardrobe, I pulled out a cardboard folder tied with string. Inside were all of our important documents. Here was the marriage certificate, here was Jabari's death certificate, and at the bottom, a thick official paper, the property deed. My finger traced the typed line. Subject of right, Imani Sadaya Okoro. Type of right, sole ownership. The sole owner. I stared at the seal in the corner, and it reminded me suddenly of the engineering blueprints from my earlier life. A memory came back, sharp, clear, like it had been waiting. I was 35. Jabari had been gone almost a year. Keon, frustrated and restless, had fallen in with the wrong kids, and I was juggling work and parenthood alone. I was summoned to the company headquarters in Atlanta. They offered me the lead position at an experimental design studio at a major aerospace firm. My own lab, a corporate apartment, an entirely different future. It was a peak I had never imagined reaching. I sat in that lofty office holding the appointment letter, and instead of seeing new machines and possibilities, I saw Keon's confused teenage face. I imagined him alone in our 2-bedroom apartment, me constantly traveling between cities, and the newly finished lakehouse we'd built becoming choked with weeds. And I declined. I said, "Thank you, but I can't. I have a son." I went back home and poured everything my ambition, my creativity, my unrealized designs into keeping that house standing, keeping some sense of stability for him. I gave up my entire career for that lakehouse, the same lakehouse I was thrown out of last night. I placed the papers on the table. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It simply clicked into place, like the final missing piece of a puzzle, the last proof I needed. My hand lifted the phone with steady confidence. First, I called the real estate agency I'd seen in the newspaper. A bright male voice answered. "Good morning, Guarantee. How can I help you?" "Hello," I said, my tone calm and steady, surprising even myself. "My name is Imani Sadia Okoro. I want to put the lake house and the land up for urgent sale, the one on Maplewood Drive and Lakeview Shores." "Understood, Mrs. Okoro. When can our specialist come for inspection and appraisal?" "Anytime. Today," I replied. "The gate key is under the big stone on the left side of the entrance. All documents are prepared and right here with me. Please proceed quickly. Of course. We'll handle it right away. I ended the call without even a flicker of hesitation. Then I dialed another number. My only true friend, Desta. We'd shared a desk in college. She was the only one who ever saw through my family. Emi? Her familiar, raspy voice answered. Happy birthday, love. I called yesterday but couldn't reach you. How was the party? I listened to her cheerful tone in silence, then quietly told her, in a few simple lines, about the cake, the trash bin, and Keon's shouting. The other end went still. Then Desta breathed out. Finally, she said, with relief and warmth blending in her voice. Finally, Imani. I've waited 20 years for this moment. They confused your kindness with weakness. So, what's your plan? Her question was sharp and honest. She knew this wasn't about a cake. The agent is putting the lakehouse up for sale this afternoon, I said evenly. Desta laughed softly into the phone. Good, very good. Now listen carefully. They'll call soon, yelling, crying, begging, manipulating. Don't answer. Not once. Let that for sale sign speak for you. It will say everything better than you ever could. All right, Desta, I responded. Stay strong, friend. You're doing what you should. I hung up. Inside me was silence, not the empty, suffocating silence from last night, but the calm, crisp quiet of an early autumn morning. It was done. There was no return. A few days slipped by, days filled with a peacefulness I hadn't felt in years. The phone on the dresser stayed quiet, and that silence told its own story. I knew their thoughts. They were waiting, expecting me to cool down like always, to bake something, bow my head, and come apologizing for daring to disturb their comfort. They were waiting for me to call and say, Keon, dear, forgive your foolish old mother.
This pattern had worked for years, but now the mechanism had snapped. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. I woke up each morning and returned to the exercises I had abandoned 2 decades ago. I went to the store and bought not the cheapest cottage cheese, but the one I actually enjoyed. I pulled my old knitting needles and a ball of yarn from the closet and began to knit. A simple, plain scarf. Row after row, loop after loop. The steady clicking of the needles was calming. This was creation. I was making something small, warm, and entirely for myself. On the outside, nothing in my routine looked different, but inside, everything had shifted. I stopped being a function, an accessory to their comfort. I was Imani Sadaya Okoro again, not just a mother and an in-law, but a whole human being. I knew this was the quiet before the storm. I couldn't see it, but I could picture the realtor's car arriving at the lakehouse, a serious man in a formal suit, taking a hammer and a bright sign from his trunk. I saw him walking across Serafina's perfect lawn, choosing a spot, and with a few firm swings, driving the post with the words, "For sale," into the ground that had once belonged to Jabari and me. That sign was my answer, my message, my goodbye. And then, on the 3rd afternoon, the phone erupted. It rang wildly, urgently, almost choking with its own noise. I sat in my chair and knitted. I watched the phone jump on the dresser. Keon called, then Serafina, then Keon again. I didn't pick up. I had nothing to tell them. Everything I wanted them to understand was already written on that sign at the gate. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to demand explanations, to restore the old order. But that order no longer existed. By evening, they came. I knew they would. I heard the car in the driveway, the doors slamming, but I didn't move. I kept knitting, row after row, loop after loop. I didn't hear knocking. Instead, I heard a sharp, unpleasant scrape in the keyhole. They didn't even knock. They entered my house with their key like owners. That was the final moment that confirmed I had chosen correctly. The door burst open. They stood in the doorway.
Serafina's face and neck were blotched red, her eyes blazing. Kian looked pale and confused, his lips shaking. They saw me sitting quietly with my knitting, and for a heartbeat, they froze. They must have expected tears, panic, but certainly not this calm, homely scene. Serafina recovered first. She rushed forward like a storm. "Have you lost your mind?" she screamed. "What is this? What kind of spectacle are you staging? You want to destroy us? Throw your own son and grandchildren out on the street?" I said nothing. I simply lifted my gaze and looked not at her twisted expression, but through her. I didn't see anger. I saw pure fear. The fear of losing the perfect picture she had carefully built at my expense. Kian stepped in, choosing the gentle, manipulative tone that had always worked. He came close, searching my face. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Are you punishing us because of the cake? Mom, I'm sorry. Serafina overreacted. But this is our home, our shared home, the home of our kids. Where are we supposed to go?"
The word "our" sounded especially hollow in that silent room. Our home, where I had been reduced to a cook, where I was treated like an embarrassment, where my effort and affection were tossed aside like scraps. I let them speak until their voices ran out. I allowed their shouting and pleading to drift through the air and fade. I looked at my son, his desperate face, and for the first time, I felt no ache of sympathy. Whatever maternal love I once had drained out of me on that birthday night, to the very last drop. What remained was cold, sharp clarity. When they finally stopped, worn out, I set my knitting on the side table, neatly, without losing a stitch, and only then did I answer. My voice was soft, but in the echoing quiet of the apartment, it struck like iron. "This is not your home." They both jerked at the words. "This is my property," I continued evenly, meeting Kian's eyes. "A house you've lived in without paying a single penny for 15 years. I never asked you for rent. I never asked for help with taxes. I only ever gave." "But I'm your son. You're my mother," Kian whispered, his last desperate card. I tilted my head slightly. My expression was one he had never seen before. There was none of the gentle warmth he relied on. "The mother everyone is tired of," I said, repeating his own insult. "The mother who embarrasses you. The mother who should leave. Remember, Kian, you told me to get out." He recoiled like I had slapped him. "And I'm finally granting your wish," I said, my voice gaining a firmness it had never shown. "I am leaving entirely. My cakes, my lake house, my savings, these are pieces of me. They all belong to me. And since you don't want me, you won't have any of it." They stared at me as if they were seeing a ghost. They couldn't comprehend that these words came from the quiet, compliant women they had used for so long. Serafina opened her mouth to yell, but no sound emerged. Kian just stood there, swallowing hard. I rose from the armchair. "The decision is final. The agent has everything he needs. He is already searching for buyers. You will have to allow showings. You have 30 days to find a new place and move your belongings." I spoke the words calmly, knowing nothing else needed to be said. I walked past them toward the window and looked into the yard at the old bench where Jabari and I once sat. I didn't look at them, but I felt the collapse of their world, a world built on someone else's effort. My real life was only beginning. They left, leaving behind a cloud of anger and disbelief. I felt nothing except stillness. I went to the phone and pulled the cord from the wall. No more calls. No more shouting. No more guilt. Every word that needed to be spoken was spoken. Every action that needed to be taken was complete. The next weeks were strange. The collapse of their world reached me faintly, like echoes from a distant valley. A couple of times, Serafina's panicked mother called, begging me to reconsider, to show mercy to the children. I calmly told her that I had shown mercy my whole life, and now it was their turn to stand on their own feet. After her second plea, I stopped answering. One afternoon, Desta called. Her voice carried concern, but no criticism. "I saw Serafina at the county clinic. She doesn't look like the queen of Turks and Caicos anymore. She's aged a decade. They moved out, ended up in a shabby 2-bedroom across the county line. Keon took a night job stocking shelves, and she's running from interview to interview. But after 15 years of being a house manager, employers aren't exactly lining up. They're fighting badly." I listened, and I felt neither cruel pleasure nor triumph.
There was only a sense of inevitability. It felt like watching an autumn leaf detach from a branch and drift downward. Its fall might be slow or swift, but the ending is already written. They pulled themselves away from the branch that once sustained them. I wasn't the force that knocked them loose. I was simply the condition they no longer honored. The lake house sold with surprising speed. Buyers appeared almost instantly. A young family who, the realtor said, fell in love with the place the moment they stepped inside. On the day of the closing, I sat in the agency office signing the papers. My hand was steady. When the amount, with rows of zeros, an amount I never dared to imagine, slid into my savings account, I felt no rush of triumph. What I felt was weight, the firm, reassuring weight of possibilities. It wasn't just money. It was the sum of my grounded years, my abandoned ambitions, all the clothes I never bought, all the vacations I gave up. It returned to me as a simple bank transfer. The first thing I did was make an appointment at a high-end hearing clinic. For years, I had ignored the fading hearing in one ear, telling myself it was too costly, something to postpone. They fitted me with a small, almost invisible device. When I walked outside and switched it on, I stopped in my tracks. I heard, truly heard, the crisp crackle of leaves beneath my shoes, a sparrow calling from a rooftop, the faint buzz of power lines across the street. The world poured over me in a wave of forgotten sounds, and I cried for the first time throughout this entire ordeal. But these were tears of rediscovery, not grief. Then I bought a coat. All my life, I had chosen practical things, dark, durable, stain-proof. But then I saw it in a shop window, a trench coat in deep royal blue, the shade of the Mississippi at dusk, utterly impractical, yet breathtaking. I walked in, tried it on, and it fit perfectly. I bought it without hesitation. Stepping onto the street in that blue coat, I felt transformed. No longer an aging woman fading into the background, but simply a woman, a whole person. And then I finally fulfilled the oldest dream Jabari and I once shared. I booked a 10-day Great Lakes cruise from Chicago to Mackinac Island. I remembered how we had saved for it years ago, only to spend the money on Keon's tutoring. "It's all right, Imani," Jabari had said. "Our boy comes first. We'll still make that trip." We never did. Before leaving, I did one more thing. I looked up the number of a community college and enrolled in an introductory textile design class. I wanted desperately to return to my beginnings, to take fabric and color in my hands, to feel patterns forming beneath my touch, to coax harmony out of chaos. And now here I am, standing on the deck of a bright white ship. The cool river wind lifts the edge of my new scarf, and I pull the blue coat closer around me. Green shores, shining spires, and quiet towns drift past. The ship glides smoothly, carving a long wake behind it. In my hands is a sketchbook. I open to a blank page. Colored pencils rest at my side. I look at the shifting water, at the dance of light and shadow, and my hand begins tracing lines, gentle curves like waves. I feel no anger, no resentment, no bitterness clings to me. There is only this moment, this sky, this open space,
this calm that runs as deep as the lake itself. For 75 years, my world had been confined to a tiny apartment and the lakehouse kitchen. I gave away my years, my savings, my affection. They took it all and cast it aside, just like that cake. But from those ruins, I didn't rebuild the old life. I simply walked away and created a new one, entirely my own. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and share in the comments whether you or someone you know has ever faced similar hurt. Your support truly matters. Subscribe so you won't miss new stories. Stay well.